Hello, everyone. I'm Janet Salmons, Research Community Manager for Sage Method Space, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Jessica Lester, who was a co-editor for this special issue in the Qualitative Inquiry Journal about exploring methodological consequences of digital research workflows. And we're joined by contributors to that issue who you'll have a chance to meet in just a moment. But before we get started, if you're new to Method Space, this is a blog community where we are interested in everything to do with designing, conducting, analyzing research, writing about it, sharing results in all different kinds of ways. And you can see at the center of this Venn diagram, we have teaching and learning, because we think that whether you are an experienced researcher or a brand new researcher, we all have something to learn. And that's why I love having these opportunities, because I always learn so much, and I hope that you will too. So to get started, I'd like to just ask Jessica to discuss a little bit, what you mean by digital workflows and how that informed this direction for the special issue.
Yeah, but first of all, thank you, Janet, for inviting us to share around the special issue. So I'm joining from Indiana University in Bloomington. I'm a professor of qualitative methodology here. So really, Janet, our thinking around digital research workflows has continued to evolve. And we're thinking more about it now as a reflexive qualitative research digital workflow, and really centering the notion of reflexivity, and specifically technological reflexivity. But by and large, in thinking about that, we're envisioning a workflow that really does align technologies of all kinds with methodologies in a coherent kind of manner, and also considers at the start with an intentional kind of mindset the role that digital tools and spaces might play in research design. And the newer part of the thinking is really around making an intentional effort to acknowledge both the intentional as well as even unknown consequences of the decision to embed technologies in a research design. So, we think about consequences as related to a qualitative research digital workflow as consequences that might impact humans, that might impact methods, that might impact the digital tools themselves, as that being really core to thinking about your workflow as well.
Right. So I'm going to ask each of you to just introduce yourselves and just tell us, a little bit about the article you contributed. So Pengfei and Peiwei, why don't you start?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you, Jenny, for inviting us to talk about this paper that we co-authored together for this special issue. My name is Pengfei Zhao, Assistant Professor of Research Methodology at McGill University. And I had this wonderful opportunity to work with Peiwei on this multi-sided critical ethnography, just to studying the experience and educational and parenting experience of transnational Chinese communities during the COVID-19 pandemic. So the paper we co-write here draws some of the data, some of the thinking from that project to really understand what does it mean to work with children, younger children in this digital world. And yeah, Peiwei, you want to say a few things about the paper as well?
Yeah, thank you, Pengfei. And it has been a really wonderful collaboration with you. And my name is Peiwei Li, and I greetings from Boston, and I teach at Lesley University in the counseling psychology program. So my background is both counseling psychology and research methodology. Yeah, so for this project, Pengfei mentioned is a larger empirical critical ethnography, and then what draw us attention is interacting with younger children, through Zoom, and then from there, we draw some methodological reflection and consideration about what technology, video conferencing specifically, can afford, and then what affordance mean. and then to think carefully and thoughtfully about that. Yeah.
Thank you. And Vivek?
Hi, my name is Vivek. I am an assistant professor of research methodology and in curriculum and instruction at Indiana University. Again, grateful to you, Janet, for creating this space for us to be in conversation, and also to Jessica and Trena for putting this together and bringing us here. So my work is specifically thinking about photography and image making technologies, and thinking about, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, how that's radically shifted. My work is a little more theoretical and conceptual, borrowing and drawing on the work of artists and writers who are interrogating some of these technologies, specifically to think about the ways in which we are or are not responding to some of these methodological changes that are happening at an unprecedented rate. So I'm thinking about how either that can become a part of our work, part of our understanding, or the ways in which we can question, engage, and play with some of these newer sort of shifts.
Well, I'm so happy to have this chance to have this conversation kind of across these different ways of thinking. But Jessica, I don't know if you wanted to say anything about the other article, The Digital Worlds Unfolding Realities. Do either of you want to say anything about that one?
Sure. Yeah. So in that particular article, I'll pass it to Peng Fei in just a moment. I'll just frame it by saying in that article, we do explicitly engage with thinking around the digital divide across a couple of different considerations, from the ways in which multilingual aspects of QDOS packages both provide potentials as well as constrain possibilities, as well as the place of digital inclusion and also the limitations of digital inclusion. And what we do in that article is think with science fiction, and I'll have Peng Fei talk a little bit about how we do that and how that provides us, in somewhat of a metaphorical way, an opportunity to think about the current context that we're all living in, whether we acknowledge it or not as social science researchers. Peng Fei.
Sure. Thanks, Jessica. The part about the social or sci-fi work, we try to incorporate into that paper. We feel very excited about that, but also we feel like it's the experimental part of the paper, a little bit unsure about how it works out. So I'm also looking forward to hear your thoughts on, after reading the paper or after hearing my brief intro about our use of sci-fi, how you feel about this. So basically what we did is to use sci-fi, Chinese sci-fi fiction, short fiction. It's called Folding Beijing, in a way as an organizing trope or organizing metaphor to put together, to assemble a set of concepts and theories to think through this issue of, either we could call it the digital divide, the digital inequality, the issue of digital accessibility. What really make us think in this novel, Folding Beijing, is this social, political, and economic allegory about, the stratification of social groups. And in that particular case, is the stratification of social groups across, socioeconomic statuses, and under the circumstances of very limiting space and resources. But we are particularly drawn into the role of technology in this allegory. So what we think, I think it's very common for us to think about digital tools as an instrument that facilitate our say practice of research. But in that allegory or in that fiction, what we see is this tool or this technology is used to shape and constrain this world. So basically then we see 3 different worlds. And then people in the different worlds really lived in their living realities without knowing much about, like people's life across the border, let's say it in this way. So they may not be very aware of the technological infrastructure that has been shaping and considering their everyday life. So I think what really makes us think is this very interesting role of technology here, and that make us wonder, what is the role of technology in our methodological practice? So some of the things are very visible for us, like the Zoom, like the software that we're using right now. But some of the things are still quite far away from us. Like when we talk about, broadband accessibility, we need to think about those service centers that might be located, thousands of miles from us, but are still very crucial in our practice of research. Like without it, I mean, if you go look at the map of digital accessibility, you will notice that, in a actually vast space of the world, there is basically no access. And then when we talk about digital worlds or digital tools, like how could we reach them? There are just, certain people out, like, we sort of like missed the opportunity to really work with them if we don't think carefully about this part of this component of our work. So that's why we are trying to think with sci-fi and trying to experiment basically with this interesting novel.
But some of those ideas are an underpinning to our whole conversation. But I would like to start, since we are talking about scholarly research, that means we have some role of theories, either framing or developing. So could each of you just talk a little bit about what theories you used in your study, how they underpinned your thinking about the digital tools and qualitative research. So Vivek, why don't you start, and we'll just go around and see what everyone thinks about this question.
Yeah, I love that framing of the question, and I really love what Pengfei and Jessica are offering us by means of thinking about sci-fi. I think I've been sitting with more recently Octavia Butler's work, Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents, like books that were written very much in the 1990s about the 2020s, which we are in right now, prophetic work. And at that moment, it makes me think about what is inconceivable for us in this moment in order to think about technology. And I often find myself that I'm turning more than towards theorists to the work of artists and writers as a way to help us think about some of that work. So in my own work, I'm kind of drawing on that as a way of thinking about both the questions and the boundaries of some of these technologies. And kind of like Pengfei noted, that thinking about, okay, what is really the edge of this, or what is it that is behind the curtain that we don't often fully recognize, understand, or comprehend. So in my own work, I am specifically trying to put the work of artists in conversation with the work of theorists and people who are sort of theorizing and writing about specifically image making technology. And I'm using image making technology rather than saying cameras, because I think we're in that space where we have to think about it more broadly, images that are made by machines and consumed by machines without human intervention. So in that sense, we're at an interesting moment. So some of the people that I'm sort of drawing heavily on is Teju Cole, who writes about photography extensively. I don't think Teju Cole would call themselves a methodologist, but I think some of the work that they're doing is specifically thinking about methods work writ large. I think humanities, social science kind of thing. And so for me, it's interesting to think about somebody who's in a different disciplinary realm and how do we think with that work, kind of like how do we use sci-fi as a way to enter some of these conversations. And then Trevor Paglin and Kate Crawford Kate Crawford is a more theorizing about AI and thinking about networks of AI. And Trevor again is an artist, and so them together, working together, and some of the questions that they're raising through their work has been important for me. So I think, like, theoretically, I'm interested in folks who are questioning the logics of some of these technologies, and also deconstructing it to the point of questioning what sometimes we might assume to be obvious, or sometimes what we might not be paying attention to.
Thank you. And I just ask if there are references that any of you bring up that you would like to share with those viewing this video. We can put those on the website so others can dig into them. But one of the points I'd just like to get a couple of points I'd like to highlight from what you said. I mean, one is that I think, in this time where, we have so much change, on one hand, we are still humans in societies. So it's not that all of the theories from the past are irrelevant, but the value of going beyond, a particular discipline to find guidance or, examples or, ways of thinking, I think is quite valuable and something that we certainly honor on method space, because we think methods are kind of discipline agnostic. But the other point that I wanted to just highlight from what you said, in terms of image making, not camera, well, there's also the other side of art making. And one of the things that I think is really interesting about our time is that while on one hand we have all of these technologies, and as researchers increasingly, we're using them in one way or another, there is also a big trend towards creative and arts methods, sometimes combined with technology, but where it's very much analog. You're drawing or collaging or manipulating materials and that sort of thing. So it's just interesting, kind of the whole spectrum that we can begin to open to understand a full range of the experience we're trying to study, of the phenomena we're trying to study. So what about others? How are you working with theory in the studies that you described in your articles?
I can chime in, and then feel free to join as well. And then Vivian, I really appreciating that interdisciplinary and the art and theory and the dialogic relationship of the different contribution or guidance from different disciplines. And for us, I think when we think about it, we also are informed by various traditions, and most prominently probably critical theory, and then also sociology, anthropology, and then and for me, I also have background in counseling and psychology, so this like really on the ground intimate encounter with the other, it's always in the back of our mind. But when it comes to this paper, and I think we really wrestle with the thinking about power, the notion of power. So we're working with children and adolescents, and the critical theory provides some framework for us to think about, power relation, and then in terms of other concepts like action, what are some conditions to action, and then what are some consequences, and how that ties to some larger social political, either reproduction or resistance or transformation. So we kind of have like some kind of meta theory that guide us, we think about methodologically, but specifically when it comes to technology, how does it enter this condition, mediating action, mediating meaning making, and then how they enter the relational sphere, but also some systemic stuff like a larger material realm, and availability or accessibility. These are some kind of larger pattern that also it's beyond just immediate relational space. So I think like that's kind of the larger framework usually guide us to think about these things. And for example, when it comes to children, voice. We often talk about giving children voice, but that itself need to be questioned and then and examine the assumption and who is giving voice, and also what is authentic. We want to have children have authentic voice. What does authenticity mean? And then and in a relationship when adult and child have some inherent assumptions, culturally, and then also the power relation that's there as researcher. And then when the technology comes in, and what does it enable, and what otherwise may be taken for granted, and but on the other side, and how technology may be constraining as well. So I think that's just like maybe the part of the framework that always in back our mind. But Pengfei, you may want to say a little bit more specific, some of the theories we borrow or contemplating that integrating into our thinking.
Yeah, I feel like you really summarize what we have been doing in this paper and in this project so well, Pei. What I think is very interesting is the potential to build a conversation between the digital worlds paper and this paper, like zooming into a very specific very specific moments of technological mediated conversations. So the digital worlds paper have been really trying to do something very on the larger scale level, like to really look at, across the areas, across the languages, and across the different abilities and body minds. What are some of the things that hinder us, or like just to try to identify boundaries and maybe obstacles and potentials. But here we are really trying to do something very interpersonal and in very micro level, on a very micro level, to really look at, just maybe a few moments, like a few minutes, what happened exactly in those minutes and moments. And Pei and I, we really try to think through some of the relational aspects of technology, like how this mediation of technology, of our interaction, in this case with the children, have been played out. And for that, we actually tried different theories, and we ended up with, unpacking and working with critical theory and the theory of affordance. But before that, we really tried to think through, some of the earliest philosophy of technology, and some of the more recent phenomenology of technology. So yeah, I would say all of these inform the final products of this paper, but maybe it's not all reflected in our writing. Yeah.
Anything you'd like to add, Jessica?
Yeah, I was just going to say with the digital worlds paper that Pengfei and as well as Trena, Paulus and I worked on. As Pengfei noted, we were thinking with a sci-fi folding Beijing, and took up the concept of folding as kind of a theoretical concept that we thought with across the paper. And as Pengfei noted, it was generative for us because it really pushed us to think about how, leaning into some of the ideas of Foucault, that we know that notions of suppression may not be directly obvious as coercion per se, but they still affect us. So thinking about digital infrastructure as the foldings that we're navigating, whether they're visible to us or not, became really a central part of thinking about the idea of a digital infrastructure has always been present, given we're all living in and through digital tools and spaces now as social science researchers and just humans. I'm really thinking through those foldings that we're navigating on a daily basis that are seen as well as unseen to us. And with that seen and unseenness brings significant consequence to our research practice, for good and for bad.
Right. Well, let's move on to, thinking, more specifically about the methods and methodologies. So, how do you see the digital tools and spaces defining and conceptualizing what you do as a qualitative researcher? So what are the implications of, some of the things we've kind of hinted at already for the methodologies and the methods that you use? So who would like to start with that one? Hey, Wei, how about you? Sure, I'm muted.
Sure. Yeah, for us, and this is talking about folding and unfolding, and those things kind of emerge from the research process, and the situation of COVID, and didn't allow us to do the interviews in person. So but then also it provides some opportunity for us to be able to interview young children and on the Zoom. And then what we have been noticing, what surprises us are those moments when children were exercising their agency in ways we didn't expect. For example, in the paper we talk about how they use an annotation tool. We're reading a storybook with them together, and then so there's a layer of kind of a material. There is a book. Now we use and then Zoom allowed to share a screen for the kids and us look at the same book. And then we're talking about book, and then we're surprised. And for example, one participant using the annotation to circle things and on the book and what he wanted to talk about. And at other times, is guiding us to the researcher to a direction that wasn't the researcher was guiding. So there's like participating and co-creating, and then that allow the children being able to do. So it just raised some question about our assumption of what children's relationship with technology, what they can do or they cannot do, and also in terms of our own assumptions of where the leading, right? Like those moments of surprise is like, yeah, the researcher guiding the child to walk through the book, but the child can exercise well. Okay, here I circle this. I wanna talk about it. Draw your attention back here. So there's a little bit more back and forth that technology allowed them to do, which just disrupt this maybe we assumed one-sided where the guidance, but then, well, yeah, we can allow them to joining and participating. And then of course some other things like synchronicity and then disruption in the interview. And we just also reflect on how much assumption that goes to the shareness. The technology allowed the shared time. Well, that's assumption, but not like shared space. And but the time, shared time, whenever that disruption happened, the delay, and then the frozen, and that they realize the shared time is always the sharedness is assumption we need to, it cannot be taken for granted. And versus like if you're in person and that shared space and then time, I think how that impact the quality of interaction. I think that's something to be think about in my practice as a practicing psychologist. And I did noticing similar kind of issue working with others in person and versus on Zoom. I remember once someone had been working always on Zoom, then we ended up with seeing each other in person. The field of that in between, and that what draw out how we experiencing each other, the whole person, and then the emotion and the nonverbal, and then something about the shared space is bring up the different experiences about the other. So I have been wondering about those differences too. What we gain and what we lose at the same time, and the time and the synchronicity as assumption. So I'll stop there.
Well, I think, just from the things that you mentioned, especially with the online interviews with the children, it seems like, for those watching this and are, trying to think about strategies for their own studies, the flexibility is so important methodologically. I mean, to allow yourself the ability to include those kinds of surprises where it could be that some participants are comfortable and have as you say, the agency combined with the digital literacy to jump in and use those tools, whereas with others, either maybe you need to explicitly show them how to use the tool, or make sure they know that you're welcome to use these tools in the a shared whiteboard or in the shared applications or whatever the tool might be. And the timing question, I think, is also one that is very interesting, and it's something that in my work about online qualitative research I've written a lot about, kind of going from on one end the ability to use a tool like we're in, the fact that you can see the other person, you kind of know that you can see that I'm not multitasking, I am not doing something else because you can see me. But at the same time, do you have kind of an agreement with, as a part of your consent process, as a part of your recruitment and bringing someone in as a participant, to understand what it is that you expect. I expect that when we are in the interview, that will be your focus, and we'll have that level of synchronicity, but maybe that isn't possible. And so how do you deal with that? And then at the same time, in the previous roundtable, which will be a link to this, one of the authors talked about issues for people with disabilities who may find that kind of synchronicity of, like, I'm asking you, I'm posing questions or prompts, and we're going back and forth right now. Maybe there are some people, for whatever reason, might prefer a little slower. That's kind of like, give me some time to think about that. Like, send me the questions in advance, or let's take a little time in between. Can I send you my answer to that question by email later this week, because I'm going to need some time to think about it. So what permissions we give people to adapt within the technology to their own styles and preferences means that as researchers, we just need to be more flexible and more comfortable with, hey, everyone may not go the same exact way. We could just, because of all those reasons. So who else would like to? Vivek, why don't you talk a little bit about what are the implications for your studies about image making?
Yeah, I think I'm appreciative of Peiwei's reminder of thinking about power and thinking about some of those asymmetries again. I think in my own work, as I'm thinking about cameras, I think now that it become the water that we swim in, like, it's all around us. We're using one right now. We have it on our person, most of us, when we're carrying a smartphone. Like 100 years ago, that would have been unimaginable. And that very technology 100 years ago was largely at the disposal of, like, racist, sexist, colonial enterprise like that. That we have to acknowledge that. And so as I'm thinking about that trajectory, there is this moment where there is a whole deal of excitement about the democratization of that technology, which we see now, where more people are using it. And I think at once there is, especially in this moment, as we are witnessing wars all over the world, and now we are seeing images from different parts of the world, there is simultaneously, mm, and I think this has continued for many years, this ascetization of suffering, this sort of consumption patterns that also happen. Folks like Sontag writing about it or thinking about the violence of the camera itself and how it's implicated. And so in my work, as I was turning towards looking at, oh, what are the ways in which artists are questioning the device itself, the construction of the device itself, and the way that it's changed, I came across this work by a couple of artists who are looking at cameras that are literally and officially designated by the state as a weapon. So one of the artists that I'm writing about uses a thermal imaging camera, which is actually designated as a weapon, which means that you and I and most ordinary people cannot buy that camera. But this is a camera that can see 30 kilometers into the distance. It is a camera that's often used to mark bodies of refugees and immigrants, and also physically attached to other weapons like fighter jets and things like that. So one of the documentaries that I'm actually talking about is footage from fighter jet pilots who were running missions in Iraq and Afghanistan from the US, UK, and other European countries that are doing this. But again, in a moment like that, I think what happens is there's a piece in the documentary where the pilot is just resting on a few children playing in a ground. For a second, that crosshair, you forget that you're looking through a weapon, and for a second you see an ordinary moment. And those slippages that happen anytime we're using any sort of technology, to me, that's also an interesting element of it, that simultaneously reminds us of, oh, this is a thing that has been used for death, destruction, and violence and domination, but it also becomes possible to use it in these other ways. I think the last thing I'll say is that with the digital world, I think one thing that I'm thinking about more and more, and this came up earlier in our conversation, is the separation of the usage of the technology itself to the physical and material resources that go into the technology. So what I mean is that often when I think of the internet, I think of the internet as this material-less entity, but every time I'm talking to you right now, we're all talking, there is a server farm somewhere that is going off. There's energy being used, there's space being used. And so that we have been so far removed from it that I think some of those physical and material and social consequences are unfathomable to us, and I think deliberately so. And I think that the gap in that, or to wedge that open and say, hey, what is actually happening behind this? And how are the ways in which that we all are participating to varying degrees in some of these technologies? I think some of the stuff around ChatGPT and DALL-E 2, like since I wrote it, it blew up. Like when I wrote it, ChatGPT was not in the open as it is now. DALL-E 2 was not in the open as it is now. But I think about how all of our actions, whether that's doing Google image searches or using our phones, we've trained some of that technology, wittingly and unwittingly. And I think that those are the questions that I'm interested in thinking about. Like, how do we also wrestle with our own complicity in this? And then also, how do we recognize that for a large part, it's going to be continued to use in these ways of domination, subjugation, and control and surveillance. I think to be able to hold both those things simultaneously and to question it feels like an important project for all of us to collectively consider.
Right. You bring up, so many, really important issues that, we are discussing on Method Space. And so I hope that viewers who are interested in these topics will take a look at some of the things that we are posting around, some of the questions, especially with the generative AI and some of those tools that are coming up. But just going to the kind of earlier part of your comments about the sort of, power issue, and thinking, and I thought was struck, by your article, in terms of thinking who had the cameras, to go into a culture that is not your own, and, what is it that you captured? And I mean, on one hand, I think, like, say, living in the American West, where, the fact that there were people who came with cameras means that we have a chance to see, what those Native people looked like, those indigenous people looked like, and that's very powerful. And the humanity and the beauty of the people who are depicted, is quite amazing. But on the other hand, and I don't know that the photographers were, what was in their minds in terms of, the power, whether they were celebrating the other people versus, but in any case, now we have more the chance to, for people to depict their own lives. And, I think, the tools, methodological tools like photo voice, where, it's like, you show me, what are the things in your community? Who are the people that are important, and what are the dynamics, and how do you see it? So I think the technology tools now allow us to open up those dynamics in a different way, and there's certainly, with the creative methods and arts-based methods, and again, things like photo voice, that give us some frameworks that we could use to incorporate those into our research. Are those some things that you're thinking about in your work with images?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of my work is like thinking with images and working with them. A different project that I've been working on has been about passport photos and the history of passport photos, but I'm inviting collaborators to intervene physically with the image itself, and to sort of play with that. I think in those instances, I'm interested again with a passport photo as an example of something that is absolutely bureaucratic and official,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, we can read into it so many different affective, sensory feelings for us. Back home, I remember, loved ones keep a passport photo of their spouse, their child in their wallet. And I found that slippage interesting. So kind of like you're saying, even if images were made of marginalized folks in settings not of their consent, there is a way in which people are speaking back. Like Tina Camp's book, Listening to Images, beautiful, provocative work that's helping us think about what is another register for us to engage with images and think about what we might not be seeing or noticing. And her move of saying, let's listen to this, which is a different cadence than seeing, but also trying to identify a different register of rhythms. And I think for me, that's the interesting gap of the slippage, where other things can happen, other things are happening. And how do we sort of pay attention to it, respond to it, and look at all these foldings, to borrow, that turn us to that phrase, like, how do we look at all these sort of different foldings?
And these are, such important questions for researchers, and hopefully for those who are viewing this, to really be thinking, about these questions, and, kind of going beyond your like immediate assumptions. I mean, one of the things that's interesting to me that I've explored in terms of, particularly interviews and focus groups like we are now. So you can see, I mean, if you were interviewing me, or you were using this recording to study my behavior, to say, well, are you looking at me? Are you looking at my facial expressions, the fact that I talk with my hands, that, are you noticing, my diploma, the books on my wall, the fact that you can see some piles of stuff, so I'm like reading books. And then at the same time, your background is blurred. So if I'm going to interview people, do I want to capture those broader kind of observations about the setting, or not, you know, and what kind of agreements do I need with participants around what I'm including? Or am I just simply saying, like, I'm using this tool because it's easy and it's immediate. I can ask you the questions, you can answer in a free-flowing, you know, natural way. And I'm just going to transcribe this as a flat transcript and, you know, put it into my data analysis software. And I, you know, no, I'm not looking at the stuff, you know, on your wall, or, you know, what your setting looks like, or, you know, asking you anything about that, and thinking, like, you know, in the article about video conferencing with children, you know, that you have, you know, do you want to see, you know, kind of where they play, and, you know, what other siblings coming into the frame, and you know, the dogs, or, you know, whatever it is. I mean, you know, do you want that, or are you simply, you know, capturing it and going by the, you know, kind of the spoken word as the responses? So, you know, they're almost kind of things that people, you know, take for granted, who are familiar with using these technologies, you know, without digging into, you know, some of the implications. And, you know, going back to some of the, you know, other things you said, it's like the Payway is bringing up about, you know, the children saying, like, well, hey, you know, I know how to use this tool. Like, wait a minute, you know, like, I'm going to, you know, I'm going to take over. And, you know, who knows, you know, the maybe older children or young adults that might say, well, let me show you this, and, you know, switch everything around in a way that is that okay? And, you know, and how do you, you know, think about that methodologically? You know, it raises a lot of questions. So who else? What other ways have the technologies influenced your methodologies, or made you kind of rethink the ways that you used qualitative approaches differently?
I think maybe I would just add like one or two things and then pass to Jessica. One thing I have been really thinking aloud recently is this idea of like multilingualism and online organization of languages, and how that might actually impact or shape our research practice in a way that we don't get a chance to talk about. It also has been rapidly evolving since, you know, maybe the 1990s till now. Like, we see different ways to incorporating different languages into the online space. And then because right now I'm in Montreal, I'm in a very multilingual city with very interesting conversations about languages almost every day. And then in my own work, and maybe also like, I don't know how much, like, but also in Payway's work, I don't know how much like Vivek also use, you know, other languages. But in my teaching and research, I do need to use like more than one language. And then I think there are just so many questions popping up through this whole process that really not get enough attention or conversation on. And sometimes like students got confused, sometimes students have like all kinds of questions, and I'm like, well, I need to think about what kind of literature I can offer you to think around, like, through this issue. So yeah, so this is one of the things that I have been investing some time to think. I mean, also we wrote together a little bit in that in the digital worlding paper as well. Yeah, maybe Jessica has more to add.
I was just going to say, listening to everyone offer some ideas of how digital tools and spaces are shaping our actual qualitative research process, it's just making me think back to you know, conceptualizations of digital workflows as really centering reflexivity with an eye towards technological reflexivity, as I'm hearing, you know, lots of different examples and what everyone is sharing around how digital tools and spaces are impacting methods. I mean, I think some of what you offer, Janet, really speak to how, and Vivek, how different uses of images and leveraging different tools shape and reshape, even the meaning of methods, and what kinds of methods we then co-develop in connection with these tools. And then such great examples of, consequences for humans here as well. I think as qualitative researchers, we often think about this as being about ethics and kind of stop short, versus thinking about when we're engaging with digital tools and spaces, what are the political consequences for humans? And the human does include the researcher as well, for the choices that we use in regards to digital tools and spaces, who might be included or excluded. Janet, I know you mentioned yesterday's panel, there was discussion around disabled scholars and as well as disabled participants. The digital tools and spaces we leverage shape those things. But also just thinking about some of these examples related to who holds the digital tool, like the example of who has the camera in their hand, how that actually links to consequences related to the outcome of your study, like what kind of knowledge is being produced, and whose ways of knowing are prioritized, whose ways of knowing are ignored. I mean, those are all consequential considerations that we should be taking into account as we think about the use of a digital tool or engagement within a digital space. And then, of course, I think, well, the special issue, Vivek hinted at this, came out just as AI started kind of exploding within the qualitative community, and thinking about the implications for us. I think new technologies really do afford us the opportunity, and if we'll take it, they also demand that we consider how the tools themselves might need to be transformed in relationship to the kinds of studies that we're envisioning. And, Janet, you mentioned that sometimes participants tell you, can we do it this way, and create tools that are more aligned with the way they might want to produce knowledge. So anyway, all that to say, just collectively, I think there are some fantastic examples that everyone is offering related to really the consequences of engaging with digital tools and spaces.
Right. But I know that it's a very big topic, but I just want to briefly, before we close, talk, a little bit about a point that's come up a couple of times, and that is the kind of digital equity, digital justice, access to broadband, the ability to use tools like the ones we're in right now depends on having a camera and broadband and etc. And not everyone has access to all of those things, or the ability to use them. And so, what are your thoughts in terms of kind of the broader questions of equity and inclusion for those of us who are interested in using technology and research, but want it to be done in a fair and ethical way?
Yeah, I can start, and I really appreciate what Vivek and Jessica, you brought back the ethical aspect of it. And Vivek, what you said about that wrestling between complacency and implication, and also this how we can use it for transformative, for equality, I kind of feel like it's constant tension. Is we're always implicated in that. Just thinking about simply the cell phone, the battery, on a global point of view, and where battery come from, where cobalt and other mineral, and how that leading to the exploitation and then some kind of a colonial struggle of resources in Congo, places like that. So I think our implication, if we think about it, it's like layer and layer. So I think the ethics, it's even from the interpersonal, but there is also like a larger systemic thinking about the capitalist flow of labor and flow of capital and flow of how that tied to what you talk about, Vivek, the dominance, subjugation, and dominance. And then I think there was a scholar wrote a book called Surveillance Capitalism, which is really interesting. This is talking about technology in the capitalist system. There's always this for claiming down instrumental, but also what's your possibility to resisting and to transforming and using it. I think that's a question, an ethical quandary for quality researchers to hold as well. We may be more removed from like those conflict and that, but we're implicated in that remotely. So what does it mean? And so that's one thought. Yeah.
Anyone else want to add to that?
I just really appreciate that, Peve, like, like again, like thinking about, oh, that in a sense, like you're hinting that the asymmetries are always there, like they're present, and there's also present at so many levels. I think that kind of makes me think about this idea of refusal and opacity. I feel like as qualitative researchers, sometimes we're often trained to, um, pardon my use of the word, but I think it connects to what you're saying, mine the data, like go find it and collect it.
Mm.
And I think there is this strange parallel with the techno-capitalists for whom data is everything, and right now we're offering it up. And I think maybe a part of the question that we also have to ask ourselves in our practice is like, where is the room to say no, in the sense of this is something that we don't want to offer up, whether that's to academy, whether that's to the techno-capitalists. Like, how do we continue refusing giving something, you know,
Mhm.
um, or refusing also to participate in some of those practices? And I think maybe like again, borrowing from Tuck and Yang and scholars who are helping us think about, okay, is there another way to do this? And what are the ways in which we can resist it, or maybe not offer up everything to the academy to be collected, to be analyzed, to be categorized, coded, like, and how do we cultivate a range of practices that are also turned towards that approach, and acknowledge it. So I really appreciate you taking us thinking about the battery in the laptop that we're using, and just like the materiality of it,
Right.
and how do we say no to some of those things.
Right. Well, I think we are kind of at the end of our time together. We could certainly, I think, talk all day on these topics, but I really appreciate your willingness to be a part of this conversation. And I hope for those who are viewing, you'll take a look at all of these articles in this special issue and think about, the implications, as they might help you to define and plan your own research. So thank you, everyone, and all the best.
Thank you, Janet.
Thank you, Janet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janet, Jessica, and Trina for just making all of this happen.